William Morrow and Harper Audio present The Earl Takes a Fancy, a Sins for All Seasons novel by Lorraine Heath, performed by Kate Redding. Prologue. London, 1854. The pain came swift and hard. Etty Trewlove gasped, pressed a hand to her swollen belly, and dropped the ladle filled with soup. It hit the scarred oak table, splattering her eldest as he held his bowl out toward her. It wasn't the first contraction to hit her. They'd been coming all day, but this one was definitely the sharpest, and she felt the wetness rolling down her legs. "Mick, go fetch Mrs. Winters. Quickly now." The lad who'd been delivered to her in the dead of night 14 years earlier didn't hesitate to dash out the door to search for the midwife. Her other darlings, 3 boys and a girl, stared at her with large eyes as round as saucers. She gave them a reassuring smile. "You're going to have to fill your own bowls. Have your dinner in the garden. Stay there until I come for you." Slowly she made her way to her small bedchamber. As she began unbuttoning her bodice, she became aware of the quiet footsteps. Glancing over her shoulder, she beamed encouragingly at her daughter. "Off with you now, Gilly. Do as you were told." "I'm staying." Her lips pressed in a mulish expression, she marched over to the wardrobe. It had been nearly 13 years since, wrapped only in a blanket, she'd been left in a wicker basket on Etty's stoop. But then all of her children had been brought to her door, one way or another. Gilly took out a nightdress and held it toward her. Etty sighed with resignation, because her daughter was the most stubborn of the lot. "Until Mrs. Winters gets here." By the time Mick returned, breathless and flushed, she was in her nightdress, tucked into bed, having suffered through 2 more contractions without screaming, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to hold her tongue. "She's off, delivering another babe," Mick announced. With such solemnity he might as well have pronounced the midwife dead. "Well then," Etty tossed back the covers, "I'd best boil some water." "We'll do it." The stoic set of Gilly's mouth didn't hide the fear in her eyes. "I can handle it, love. Just tell us what to do, Mum." And so she did. And 4 hours later, within her arms, she cradled the most beautiful babe upon whom she'd ever set eyes. Skimming her fingers lightly over the dark hair, with sorrow, she reminisced briefly about the 2 babes she'd given her husband, and the sweet joy they'd brought with their arrival. But then Michael had died, and shortly thereafter, so had her little ones. She'd begun taking in byblows as a way to earn a few coins. Now she had one of her own. "What you going to name her?" Gilly asked. "Fancy. Because one day she will not live in the squalor her mum did, but she will marry a fancy man, live in a fancy house, and enjoy a fancy life." She smiled warmly at the 5 children surrounding her. "You'll all have fancy lives." Chapter 1. London, 1873. A man's life was bookended by 2 events, the day he was born and the day he went toes up. Interspersed throughout were other critical moments, but for the Earl of Rosemont, only 3 were of any consequence: the day he wed, the night his wife died, and the morning she rose from the grave to wreak havoc on his life. Sitting at the desk in his library, opening the newspaper his butler had dutifully ironed, he once more read the letter that had ruined his appetite at breakfast 3 days earlier. "To the noble ladies of London, it is with unheralded sorrow, tempered by a great deal of hope, that I pen this letter. The very fact that you, gentle ladies, are reading it today signals that it has been 1 year exactly since my passing. We all know
Sample complete. Ready to continue?